And so now I actually want to go over a tool that I haven't talked about in a little bit, but I think it's important. It's the clicker. So the clicker is really this really fantastic tool. Now, it's not like a panacea that it's going to fix a whole bunch of things. As a matter of fact, using a clicker incorrectly can actually amplify your problems. And you know what? I'm going to jot that down, okay? Because I think I want to talk about that next time, about how a clicker can amplify problems and how, and you know, what types of situations are sometimes trainers using that are going to amplify those. So let me just kind of give you some advantages with clickers. So the big thing that a clicker does is it obviously utilizes the speed of sound. So I'm going to go back to the topic that I mentioned before about how the brain releases dopamine, to make memories and to experience pleasure. So when you've actually conditioned a clicker the proper way, what will happen then is when the clicker goes off and that sound hits the dog's ear and hits the brain at the moment that it receives that signal is going to release that dopamine. The reason that this is advantageous is because if you're actually, let's say, 10, 20 steps away from the dog and you begin to walk towards the dog, even walk quickly, and then you dispense the food, the dog isn't going to actually release the dopamine until it probably sees the treat or until it probably tastes the treat. But if you condition a clicker right, the clicker will actually make the dog believe that the food and the treat is already in its mouth at the moment that the sound hits it, and the food could actually be 5, 10, 20 seconds away from actually happening. So one of the big things that the clicker does is it moves the reward much more rapidly than any human could. So let me give you a scenario where this could be useful. I actually just trained this with a young lady just a little while ago. We had her dog in a downstay, and then we moved away probably about 15 or 20 paces. So we turned around, the dog was doing exactly what we wanted it to do, and then we clicked, and then immediately after we clicked, we began to praise, and we walked back to the dog and rewarded it. But the reward actually happened at the moment that the dog heard the click. So that's one of the advantages. Now, that's the second advantage. So one is the speed of sound, and second, it actually allows you to build distance. So when you use the clicker and you're further away, you can actually accelerate that training of how far you are away from the dog by using a clicker. Now, one really big advantage to me, okay, is it gets the food out of your hands. It's really easy to get trapped by, hey, you've put food in your hand and you're getting the dog to do all these things, it's responding wonderfully, and then the dog does what you want and you give it food. But one of the problems with that technique, okay, is the dog can actually become dependent on the food in your hand. It's a little challenging, and I'll admit everybody struggles with this, including myself with dogs. It's a little challenging to know when do I actually take the food out of my hand and just ask the dog to do it just for my voice. And it's a process, and you're gonna have to guess. So let me just kind of go back over the clicker one more time, okay? So what are 3 advantages of using a clicker? Well, one is that the speed of sound is incredibly fast. It's 767 miles per hour. So that actually allows you to be off a great distance from your dog and then click, and your dog is gonna know that, hey, when she is 10, 20, 30 steps away, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. But then the other major advantage is that it actually allows you to get the food out of your hand. And let me just go back over this because I think this is important. When I teach the clicker, I actually teach like what's called a triangle technique. This is something that I've just made up. So I have people put the clicker in their right hand, okay? And I have them click, and then I have them begin to praise. And then after they praise, they're gonna use their left hand to go behind their back to grab the food. So I teach click, talk, reach. And I really emphasize that because that's gonna help your dog to learn how to look at your face instead of your hand. Can you use your voice in place of a clicker? So here's the easy answer. The easy answer is yes. You can use your voice in place of the clicker. Here's the problem, okay? The problem with using your voice instead of the clicker is that your voice is going to have a lot of different inflections. So for example, okay, a lot of people, myself included, will use the word yes, or will use like a word like okay. And so what happens is that sometimes you're like yes, and sometimes your dog does it really awesome and you're like yes. So what happens there is that you're going to begin to change what the clicker is, which is what's called a moment marker. And a moment marker, what that's intended to do is to tell the dog that that specific thing that you just did leads to this very specific consequence, like me throwing a ball. But what people begin to get confused is that they'll use a verbal moment marker, like a word like yes, and they'll confuse it and turn it into praise. So for example, let's just say that I was going to use okay as my moment marker to tell my dog that it did a good job at sitting. So I would say sit, then I would see the dog's butt hit the floor, and at the moment it hit the floor, I would say okay. And then what might happen is that I might actually say the word okay again. I'm like, okay, you're such a good dog. Okay, good job. And so everything that I did there, when you saw my face brighten up and I begin to give that praise, the word okay becomes part of the praise. And so as you begin to use this word ambiguously, where it actually is used as a moment marker and used as praise, it can actually confuse your dog. I'll give you an example, okay? So I was doing some protection work with one of my dogs, and my dog was in a downstay. And what the dog was supposed to do next is that when the bad guy took off, my dog was allowed to go and chase after him and to, bite the sleeve and to try to stop him from leaving. So I had my dog in a down, the bad guy was there, and I was talking with the bad guy. The bad guy asked me a question, and I said the word okay to the bad guy. And at that moment, my dog then said, oh, that means that I can go get him and I can, bite the piece of equipment. And that my dog was not wrong. Gabby wasn't wrong in believing that. But it wasn't what I wanted to do. This is why a clicker is better, because when you use a clicker, it's not actually going to, you're not going to use it in a piece of conversation where somebody's going to ask you a question and you're going to click the clicker. But you're going to use words like okay and yes and different things like that, and it might confuse your dog. But here's the thing, look, those types of things happen. People misuse clickers all the time too, but I just think that it's important to actually use verbal, to be able to use clickers, okay, and then just be very specific with your verbal moment markers. I'll give you a really funny one. I have a camera, I have a GoPro, and this GoPro actually has voice commands. So I can actually have the camera right here, and then I could say, GoPro, take a picture. Well, if I ever have my dog right next to the GoPro and I'm going to take a picture, I would love to use it as a voice command to tell the camera to take a picture of my dog. But it's so funny because I'll have the camera up and I'll tell it to take a picture, and my dog believes that that word go means that it should get a reward. So I've had my dog a couple of times when I say GoPro, take a picture, GoPro, take a picture, that the dog will maybe bite the camera or try to get up and break the shot. So that's one of the drawbacks to verbal moment markers that people really want to be careful. Hey, but thanks so much for the question.